Hi, welcome to the Silent Avenger channel. If you're enjoying the content, please consider giving it a like and sharing your thoughts in the comments. Let's dive into today's story. My name is Ben, I'm 34, and I've been married to Laura for 8 years. Up until recently, I thought we had a good marriage. Sure, we've had our ups and downs, but who doesn't? If you asked me a month ago, I'd have told you we were solid. Now, I don't even know what's real anymore. It started with little things. Laura being glued to her phone, laughing at messages she wouldn't share, saying it was just a group chat with the girls. She started going out more often, always with vague plans about catching up with friends or a quick errand. I'm not the kind of guy who gets paranoid, but something about her behavior felt off. I chalked it up to stress. She's been busy with work, and I figured maybe I was overthinking. Then there was David. He's been my best friend since college, and we've been through everything together. Breakups, job changes, you name it. He's practically family. He's always been close to Laura too, but it never bothered me. They joke around, and honestly, I liked that they got along. It felt like I had the best of both worlds, a great wife and a best friend who fit into my life seamlessly. But recently, David started acting weird too. He'd cancel plans last minute or avoid hanging out. When we did meet up, he was distracted, constantly checking his phone. A part of me wanted to dismiss it, but the pit in my stomach wouldn't go away. It was like my gut knew something my brain refused to acknowledge. One night, Laura came home late, reeking of wine and perfume. I asked her how her evening was, and she said, "Fine, just a girl's night." But something about the way she avoided my eyes made me press further. She snapped at me, accusing me of being controlling. That wasn't like her, and it stung. I let it go, but the seed of doubt had already been planted. The breaking point came a week later. David had posted a picture on Instagram, nothing unusual, just a scenic shot from a hike. But I noticed something in the corner of the frame, a familiar necklace. It was Laura's. She wore it all the time, and there was no mistaking it. My heart sank. Why would she be on a hike with David without telling me? I decided I needed to know the truth. I wasn't going to accuse anyone without proof, so I started paying attention. Over the next few days, I noticed the way Laura guarded her phone like it held state secrets. I couldn't take it anymore, so one night while she was asleep, I checked her messages. It wasn't easy to do, but at that point, I felt like I was losing my mind. What I found confirmed my worst fears. Messages between Laura and David, flirty, suggestive, and far too intimate for comfort. There were plans to meet up, little jokes at my expense, and one message from David that made my stomach churn. "I can't wait to see you again, beautiful." I put the phone down, shaking. I didn't know what to do. Do I confront her? Do I confront him? How do I even start? For the first time in my life, I felt completely lost. After that night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured them together. I replayed every interaction between Laura and David in my mind, questioning everything. Were all those friendly hugs more than just friendly? Was I blind this whole time, or did this just start? I knew I needed more evidence before confronting either of them. Maybe it was cowardly, but I didn't want them to have any wiggle room to deny it. So, I started paying closer attention to Laura's behavior. Every time she said she was going out, I'd casually ask where she was going and with who. Her answers were vague at best, dismissive at worst. She'd roll her eyes and say something like, "Why are you so curious all of a sudden?" It stung because I wasn't curious, I was desperate. I started tracking her little lies. One night, she said she was meeting her friend Amy. I knew Amy pretty well, so I texted her casually, asking how her night was going. Amy said she was home, feeling under the weather. My chest tightened. Laura didn't come home until almost midnight, claiming she had lost track of time. I nodded and acted like I believed her, but inside, I was boiling. The same week, David texted me out of the blue, saying he was swamped with work and couldn't meet up for our usual Saturday hangout. That same night, Laura went out again, wearing a dress I hadn't seen in years. I complimented her, and she gave me a smile that felt wrong. Forced, maybe. I didn't say anything as she walked out the door, but I couldn't sit still. My gut told me something was happening, and I wasn't going to ignore it anymore. I drove to David's neighborhood. His car was in the driveway, but all the lights in his house were off. I parked down the street and waited. About an hour later, I saw Laura's car pull up. She got out, glanced around nervously, and walked to his door. My heart felt like it was going to burst out of my chest. I gripped the steering wheel so hard my knuckles turned white. I wanted to get out of the car, to yell, to demand answers right then and there. But I didn't. I couldn't. I was frozen. Instead, I drove away. I don't even remember the drive home. My mind was racing with a million thoughts. Why him? How long had this been going on? Was it something I did, or didn't do? I hated myself for driving away, but I also knew I needed a plan. I wasn't going to storm in there without knowing how to handle it. That night, I couldn't stop shaking. I called my sister, Rachel. She's always been the one person I can trust with anything. I didn't tell her everything, just that I thought Laura might be cheating and that it involved someone close to me. Rachel was furious on my behalf, but she told me to stay calm, think it through, and decide what I wanted to do next. The next day, I got my answer. Rachel called me, her voice shaking. "Ben, I think I know who it is." "What do you mean?" I asked, though I already knew. She hesitated, then said, "David. I saw him with Laura at the coffee shop by my office. They didn't see me, but the way they were sitting, leaning close. I didn't want to believe it, but..." Her voice cracked, and I could tell she felt guilty for not saying something sooner. I reassured her it wasn't her fault, but hearing it from someone else made it all too real. My best friend. My wife. Together. I had my proof, but I felt more broken than vindicated. The question now was, how do I confront them? After Rachel confirmed my suspicions, I didn't know whether to cry, scream, or punch a wall. It wasn't just my wife, it was David, my best friend, someone I trusted like a brother. The betrayal cut deeper than I ever thought possible. Rachel, being the level-headed one, suggested we meet up and talk it through. We met at her apartment that evening. She poured me a cup of coffee, and I just sat there, staring at the table, trying to process it all. "I don't get it," I said finally. "David's supposed to be my friend. He was at our wedding. He gave a speech about how lucky I was to have Laura. How does he do this to me?" Rachel sighed. "Some people are just selfish, Ben. They don't think about anyone but themselves. Maybe it's not even about you, it's about their own messed up desires." That thought didn't make me feel any better. What do I do? Confront Laura? Confront him? Rachel shook her head. "Not yet. If you come at them without a plan, they'll just lie or try to twist things around. You need to make sure they can't deny it." She was right, of course. I wasn't ready to confront them, not emotionally, and not strategically. But I also couldn't keep living like this, pretending I didn't know. That's when Rachel said something that changed everything. "Ben, if you want to get to the bottom of this, maybe I can help. I know how David's wife, Rachel, yeah, her name's Rachel too, has been feeling off lately. She told me once she thinks David's been distant. Maybe she suspects something too." The idea hit me like a ton of bricks. David's wife, Rachel, might be just as hurt and confused as I was. Maybe we could work together to expose them. "Do you think she'd talk to me?" I asked. Rachel nodded. "I think so. She's nice, Ben. She doesn't deserve this any more than you do." I felt a flicker of hope for the first time in days. Maybe this wasn't something I had to face alone. The next day Rachel, my sister, arranged for me to meet Rachel, David's wife. I was nervous as hell, unsure how she'd react or if she even knew anything was wrong. We met at a quiet cafe, and as soon as she sat down across from me, I could see the worry in her eyes. "Rachel," I started, fumbling for the right words. "This is going to sound crazy, but I think something's going on between Laura and David." Her face went pale, and her hands started to tremble. "What do you mean?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I explained everything, Laura's late nights, the texts, the lies. I even mentioned seeing Laura at David's house. Rachel listened in silence, her expression shifting from shock to anger to something that looked a lot like heartbreak. When I finished, she took a deep breath and said, "I had a feeling. I didn't want to believe it, but he's been acting so strange. Distant. Cold. And there were a few nights he said he was working late, but his boss mentioned he left early. I didn't think much of it at the time, but now, it all makes sense." We sat there, two betrayed spouses, trying to figure out what to do next. Eventually, Rachel said, "If they're lying to us, then maybe it's time we turn the tables. Give them a taste of their own medicine. What do you mean? I asked, curious but cautious. We'll stage something. Make them think we're cheating on them. See how they like it. At first, the idea seemed absurd, but the more I thought about it, the more it appealed to me. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about forcing them to confront their own hypocrisy. Rachel and I started brainstorming, and by the end of the evening, we had a plan. It was risky, it was messy, and I wasn't entirely sure it would work. But at that point, I had nothing to lose. Rachel and I worked out the details of our plan over the next couple of days. It wasn't something I ever thought I'd be doing, teaming up with my best friend's wife to fake an affair, but desperate times call for desperate measures. The idea was simple: we'd create a video of us looking cozy, hinting at something more than friendship. Nothing explicit, just enough to suggest we'd crossed a line. Then, we'd send it to Laura and David anonymously. The goal was to provoke them, to see how they reacted when the shoe was on the other foot. Rachel was surprisingly calm about the whole thing. If they're cheating, they deserve to feel what we're feeling, she said firmly. And if they're not, well, I guess we'll know for sure. I wasn't as confident, but I agreed. I didn't want to confront them empty-handed, and this plan gave us a way to force their hands. A few nights later, we met at Rachel's house to record the video. It was awkward at first, posing like we were a couple, laughing nervously as we tried to make it look believable. Eventually, Rachel leaned her head on my shoulder and whispered, "Just think about what they've done to us. Use that." That was all I needed. We took a short video, clinking glasses and toasting to new beginnings. At one point, Rachel playfully touched my face, and we exchanged a knowing look that felt painfully real. When we were done, we both sat back, staring at the screen. "Do you think this will work?" I asked. Rachel nodded. "If they're guilty, they won't be able to ignore it." With a deep breath, we sent the video from a burner phone to Laura and David. Then, we waited. The response came quicker than I expected. Less than an hour after we sent the video, Laura stormed into the house. Her face was red, and she was clutching her phone like it was a grenade about to go off. "What the hell has this been?" she demanded, shoving the screen in my face. I glanced at it, feigning confusion. "What do you mean?" "Don't play dumb," she snapped, her voice shaking. "You and Rachel? Are you serious?" Her reaction told me everything I needed to know. I'd half expected her to play it cool, but the sheer panic in her voice gave her away. Still, I didn't let up. "You're the one who's been sneaking around, Laura," I said, keeping my tone even. "You're lying to me about where you've been, acting like I don't notice. And now you're mad at me? Why don't you explain this?" She froze for a moment, her mouth opening and closing like she was searching for words. I don't know what you're talking about," she stammered. "You're just being paranoid." "Am I?" I asked, stepping closer. "Because I saw you at David's house last week. Care to explain that?" Her face went pale, and she started to stutter. He needed advice about Rachel." It was such an obvious lie I almost laughed. Before I could say anything, her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her expression shifting to one of dread. "Is that David?" I asked sharply. She didn't answer. Instead, she grabbed her purse and bolted out the door without another word. Meanwhile, Rachel texted me, saying she'd had a similar reaction from David. He'd called her the moment he got the video, accusing her of being unfaithful. "The nerve of him," she wrote. "He's losing it. Keeps saying I ruined everything." The plan had worked, but it didn't feel as satisfying as I thought it would. Instead, I felt sick, knowing the confrontation was far from over. The truth was out there now, and there was no going back. The next morning, Laura came home, her face drawn and tired like she hadn't slept all night. She dropped her purse on the table and sat down across from me without saying a word. "Where were you?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "With Amy," she said quietly, avoiding my eyes. I leaned forward. "You expect me to believe that? After everything I've seen?" Her head shot up, and for a moment, I saw a flicker of defiance. But it crumbled almost instantly. "Fine," she muttered. I went to talk to David. He was upset about the video. I needed to calm him down. I let that sink in before responding. "You needed to calm him down? After everything he's done? After he's been sneaking around with my wife?" Her face flushed red, and she looked down at her hands. "It's not what you think," she whispered. "We didn't mean for it to happen. There it was, the admission I'd been dreading and expecting all at once. My stomach twisted, but I forced myself to stay composed. How long? I asked flatly. She hesitated, tears welling up in her eyes. A few months, she said, barely above a whisper. Months. My best friend and my wife had been lying to me for months. My hands clenched into fists, and I had to take a deep breath to stop myself from shouting. Why? Laura wiped at her eyes, but she couldn't look at me. I don't know, Ben. I was lonely. You've been so distant, so caught up in your work. Don't you dare blame this on me, I snapped. I've been here, Laura. I've been trying. And while I was trying, you were running to him. She broke down completely then, sobbing into her hands. But I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. I can't do this right now, I said, standing up. You need to pack a bag and go. Stay with your friend, Amy, or wherever you've been sneaking off to. I need time to think. Laura didn't argue. She just nodded, still crying, and went upstairs. A few minutes later, I heard the door close behind her. For the first time in days, the house was silent. But the weight of everything that had happened pressed down on me, and I realized the hardest part was still ahead. Later that day, Rachel called me. Her voice was shaky, but there was an edge of determination in it. Ben, David came clean, she said. He admitted everything. What did he say? I asked, my jaw tightening. He said it started after one of your barbecues last summer, she explained. He and Laura stayed late to help clean up. I guess that was when it began. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. He said it wasn't just physical, though. He said he fell for her. I gritted my teeth, feeling a fresh wave of anger. And what about you? What did he say about you? Rachel gave a bitter laugh. He said he was confused, that he didn't know how to tell me. As if that's some kind of excuse. There was a long silence between us before she added, he asked if I'd consider forgiving him. Said he was willing to work things out. I couldn't believe it. And what did you say? I told him I'd think about it, she admitted. What? I couldn't hide the disbelief in my voice. After everything he's done? Ben, I don't know what to do, she said, her voice breaking. This is my whole life we're talking about. Our kids, our house. Her words hit me hard. I'd forgotten, in the chaos of my own pain, just how much Rachel stood to lose. You don't owe him anything, I said firmly. He's the one who destroyed your life, not you. She sighed. I know. I need time to figure it all out. We talked a little longer, sharing our frustrations and heartbreak. By the time we hung up, I realized Rachel was as lost as I was. Neither of us knew what the future held, but one thing was certain, the damage was done, and there was no undoing it. That night, I sat alone in the quiet house, scrolling through old photos of me, Laura, and David. Each one felt like a cruel joke now, a reminder of how blind I'd been. For the first time in days, I let myself cry, not just out of anger, but for everything I'd lost. I didn't know what my next move would be, but I knew one thing for sure, nothing would ever be the same again. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Laura. It was long, too long, but I read it anyway. Ben, I know I'm the last person you want to hear from right now, but I need you to know I'm sorry. I didn't mean for things to get this far. David and I. It wasn't supposed to happen. I don't even know how it started. He was there, and I felt like I could talk to him in a way I couldn't with you anymore. I know that's no excuse, but I never stopped loving you. I just made a mistake. Please, can we talk? I'll do whatever it takes to make this right. I stared at the message, my stomach churning. There was a time when words like that would have meant something to me. When I might have believed her. But now? Now it just felt hollow. I didn't respond. Instead, I scrolled through my contacts and found David's number. My finger hovered over the call button for a moment before I pressed it. He picked up after a few rings. Ben, he said cautiously, his voice thick with tension. Meet me at the park, I said coldly. We need to talk. I arrived first, sitting on a bench near the playground where we used to bring his kids. It felt surreal, waiting for the man who'd shattered my life, in a place filled with memories of better times. When David showed up, he looked like he hadn't slept in days. He approached slowly, hands stuffed in his jacket pockets. Ben, he started, but I held up a hand to stop him. Save it, I said. I don't want excuses or apologies. I just want to know why. David sat down, his head hanging low. I don't know, he said quietly. It just happened. That's not good enough, I snapped. You don't just happen to sleep with your best friend's wife. You made a choice. He nodded, staring at the ground. You're right. I did. And it was the worst decision of my life. His words should have made me feel better, but they didn't. If anything, they made me angrier. Do you even realize what you've done? You've destroyed my marriage, your marriage, our friendship. For what? A fling. It wasn't a fling, he said, his voice breaking. I thought I loved her. I stood up, unable to sit still any longer. Well, congratulations, David. You got what you wanted. I hope it was worth it. He didn't respond, and for a moment, I thought about walking away. But there was one more thing I needed to say. You and Laura deserve each other, I said. Because you're both selfish, lying cowards. But I'm done letting you two take anything else from me. With that, I turned and walked away, leaving David sitting on the bench, staring at nothing. I didn't look back. I couldn't. For the first time in weeks, I felt a small sliver of control return to my life. It wasn't much, but it was a start. After my confrontation with David, I expected some kind of fallout, maybe a barrage of calls or texts from Laura. But for the next 2 days, there was silence. It was unsettling, like the calm before a storm. I tried to distract myself, throwing myself into work and avoiding my phone. But no matter how busy I kept myself, the weight of what had happened lingered. Every quiet moment brought memories of Laura's laugh, David's jokes, and the life I thought I had. On the third day, Rachel, David's wife, called. He moved out, she said bluntly. What? I asked, caught off guard. David, she clarified. He packed some of his stuff and left this morning. Said he's staying at a friend's place. He wants to give me space. I could hear the hurt in her voice, even though she was trying to sound tough. Are you okay? I asked, unsure of what else to say. I don't know, she admitted. Part of me feels relieved, but the other part, it feels like losing him is losing a piece of myself. I hate that I still care, after everything. Her words hit close to home. I felt the same way about Laura. No matter how angry or betrayed I was, there was a part of me that still wanted to hold on to the version of her I thought I knew. Later that night, as I sat on the couch staring at the TV, my phone buzzed. It was Laura. Can we talk? Just once. I need to see you. I didn't reply right away. I wanted to ignore her, to block her and move on. But a part of me needed closure. I needed to hear her say it to my face. The next day, we met at a small diner on the edge of town. Laura looked different, worn down, like she'd aged 10 years in a week. Thanks for meeting me, she said, her voice soft. I didn't respond, just gestured for her to speak. She sighed, running a hand through her hair. I know you hate me right now. I hate myself too. But I need you to understand, I never wanted to hurt you. I don't even know how it got to this point. David was just there. And I was weak. I clenched my fists under the table. Weak? You're blaming this on weakness? You had every chance to stop, Laura. Every chance to come clean. But you didn't. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she reached for my hand, but I pulled away. I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, she said. But I can't lose you, Ben. Please, tell me there's still a chance. Her words should have stirred something in me, but all I felt was emptiness. There's no chance, Laura, I said quietly. You didn't just cheat. You broke everything we built together. And I can't come back from that. She started to cry, but I didn't feel like comforting her. Instead, I stood up, threw some cash on the table for the coffee, and walked out. As I got into my car, I felt a strange sense of finality. It wasn't relief exactly, but it was something close. For the first time, I knew what I had to do, leave the wreckage behind and start rebuilding on my own. In the days following my final conversation with Laura, I started the process of untangling our lives. It was harder than I expected, not just logistically, but emotionally. Every box I packed, every photo I found, reminded me of what I thought we had, and what we'd lost. Laura texted a few times, asking if we could talk again, but I didn't respond. I knew if I gave her an inch, she'd try to pull me back into the mess, and I couldn't afford to let that happen. Rachel, on the other hand, checked in often. Her texts were brief, but they made a difference. "How are you holding up? Need anything? I'm here." I didn't always respond, but knowing she was there helped. We were both struggling, but there was a strange comfort in knowing I wasn't alone. One afternoon, I got a call from Laura's parents. Her mom, Cheryl, had always been kind to me, and hearing her voice brought a lump to my throat. "Ben," she said gently, "we heard what happened. I'm so sorry." I wasn't sure what to say. "Thanks, Cheryl. It's been a lot. We don't know what Laura was thinking," she continued. "But I want you to know, you've always been like a son to us. No matter what happens, we're here for you." Her words caught me off guard. I'd expected them to side with Laura, to brush off what she'd done, but instead, Cheryl's voice was full of disappointment. "We told her she made the biggest mistake of her life," Cheryl added. "She's devastated, Ben. I don't know if that means anything to you, but I thought you should know. It didn't mean much." Laura's regret couldn't undo the damage. But knowing her parents didn't condone her actions gave me some closure. That evening, I met Rachel for coffee. We sat outside, bundled up against the chill, and talked about everything and nothing. "David's been texting me," she admitted, "saying he wants to come home, that he'll do anything to fix things. Do you believe him?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not really. But it's hard to let go, you know? We've built so much together. It's like losing part of myself." I nodded. "I get it. It's not just them we're losing, it's the life we thought we had." Rachel sighed, stirring her coffee. "What about you? Any second thoughts about Laura?" "No," I said firmly. "She made her choice. Now I'm making mine." For the first time, Rachel smiled, a small, tired smile, but genuine. "Good. You deserve better, Ben." "We both do." We sat in silence for a while after that, the weight of everything hanging between us. But for the first time, it felt manageable, like maybe, just maybe, we'd get through this. Just as I was starting to find a semblance of stability, something unexpected happened. Late one evening, my phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "You need to know the full story. Meet me tomorrow at the cafe on Main at noon. David." My chest tightened as I stared at the message. What could he possibly have to say now? I debated ignoring it, but curiosity got the better of me. If there was more to the story, I needed to hear it, even if it hurt. The next day, I arrived at the cafe 10 minutes early, nervous but determined. David was already there, sitting at a corner table, looking like a shell of the man I once knew. "Thanks for coming," he said as I sat down. "I'm not here to make small talk, David," I said, cutting to the chase. "What do you want?" He nodded, as if he expected my tone. I need to clear the air," he said. "There's something you don't know, about Laura and me." I crossed my arms, waiting. David sighed heavily, staring into his coffee. "It wasn't just about feelings or attraction," he began. She was unhappy, Ben. She said you'd been pulling away, that you were distant. She needed someone to lean on, and I guess I let myself become that person." I felt my temper rising but stayed silent, letting him continue. "She told me things," he added. "Things about your marriage, about how you weren't communicating anymore. And he stopped, his voice cracking. "I let myself believe that I was helping her, that I was what she needed. Do you hear yourself?" I snapped. "You're justifying an affair by saying you were helping her? You weren't helping anyone, David. You were feeding your own ego." He winced but didn't argue. "You're right. I messed up. I crossed a line I never should have. But I also need you to know, it wasn't just her. I wasn't innocent in this. I pursued her as much as she pursued me. Maybe more." The admission hit me harder than I expected. I'd spent weeks blaming Laura, painting her as the instigator, but hearing David take responsibility shifted something in me. Not enough to forgive him, but enough to remind me that both of them had made choices, and neither deserved a pass. "I don't care who started it," I said finally. "You both betrayed me. That's all I need to know." David nodded slowly. "I get it. I needed you to hear it from me. I'm sorry, Ben. For everything." I stood up, done with the conversation. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for, David. But it's not going to be forgiveness from me." As I walked out of the cafe, I felt a strange sense of closure. David's apology didn't fix anything, but it solidified one thing: I wasn't the one to blame here. Their actions were their own, and I was finally ready to stop carrying the weight of their mistakes. After my meeting with David, I thought I'd feel better. I didn't. If anything, his attempt at taking responsibility left me more frustrated. It wasn't that I expected him to grovel, I just didn't know what to do with the emotions that kept bubbling up. That night, I sat on the couch, staring at the blank TV screen. My house felt suffocatingly quiet without Laura. Her absence was everywhere: in the empty side of the bed, the lack of her favorite mug in the sink, the missing sound of her humming while she cooked. It was like living in a ghost town, haunted by memories of what used to be. I texted Rachel to let her know about my meeting with David. She called almost immediately. "What did he say?" she asked, her voice sharp. I relayed the conversation as best as I could, and by the end, she was as angry as I was. "He's unbelievable," she said, trying to paint himself as some kind of savior. Like he had no choice but to step in and help Laura. "Yeah," I said bitterly. "It's pathetic." Rachel sighed. "It's not just pathetic, Ben. It's manipulative. He's trying to make himself look better, probably to ease his own guilt. Don't let him make you question yourself." I appreciated her words, but they didn't stop the nagging doubts creeping into my mind. Had I really been that distant? Could I have done something to stop this from happening? The next day, I forced myself to face the reality of the situation. I started sorting through the things Laura had left behind: clothes, books, trinkets. Each item felt like a punch to the gut, a reminder of the life we'd built together. I found our wedding album tucked away in the back of a closet. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Page after page, there we were, smiling, laughing, surrounded by friends and family. The happiness on our faces felt like a cruel joke now. I was about to close the album when I saw a photo of David giving his best man speech. His arm was around Laura, and they were both grinning. At the time, it had seemed like a normal moment between two people who were close. Now, it felt like a warning sign I'd been too blind to see. I slammed the album shut and shoved it back into the closet. I couldn't look at it anymore. That evening, Rachel texted me again. "Want to grab a drink? I could use the company." I hesitated. Part of me wanted to say no, to avoid dealing with any of it. But another part of me knew I couldn't keep isolating myself. "Sure," I replied. "Where do you want to meet?" We met at a quiet bar downtown, far from the places we'd usually go with our respective spouses. Rachel was already there when I arrived, nursing a glass of wine. "You okay?" I asked as I sat down. She shrugged. "As okay as I can be, considering." We spent the next hour talking about everything except David and Laura. For a while, it felt almost normal, like two friends catching up. But eventually, the conversation circled back to what had brought us together in the first place. "I hate that I still feel torn," Rachel admitted, staring into her glass. "Part of me wants to hate him, to cut him out of my life completely. But the other part, I don't know. It's hard to let go of someone you've loved for so long." I nodded. "I get it. I keep thinking about Laura too. Even after everything, it's like my brain can't fully accept that she's not who I thought she was." Rachel looked at me, her eyes filled with empathy. "We were both blindsided, Ben. But that doesn't mean we're weak for caring. It just means we're human." Her words hit me harder than I expected. For weeks, I'd been beating myself up for not being strong enough to move on. Hearing Rachel say it wasn't weakness made me feel, for the first time, that maybe I didn't have to have it all figured out just yet. As we left the bar, Rachel stopped me outside. "Thanks for meeting me tonight," she said. "Of course," I replied. "We're in this together, right?" She smiled, but there was a sadness behind it. "Yeah, together." We stood there for a moment, the cold night air wrapping around us. For the first time, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that even in the darkest moments, there's always a chance to rebuild. In the days that followed, I started taking small steps toward rebuilding my life. The first thing I did was pack up the last of Laura's belongings. It was harder than I expected. Every item felt like another piece of our life together slipping away. But when I finally dropped off the boxes at her sister's house, a strange sense of relief washed over me. Rachel called later that day. "How'd it go?" she asked. "It was fine," I said. "Hard, but I feel lighter now, I guess." "That's good," she said. It's all about baby steps, Ben. One thing at a time. Rachel's words stayed with me. I realized I didn't have to figure everything out all at once. Just putting one foot in front of the other was enough for now. I also started going back to the gym, something I'd neglected during all the chaos. At first, it felt like going through the motions, but as the days went on, the physical activity became a kind of therapy. It gave me something to focus on, something I could control. Rachel and I kept in touch, though our conversations became less about David and Laura and more about the future. She mentioned taking a short trip with her kids to visit her parents, a much-needed escape from the reminders of what had happened. You should do something for yourself too, she suggested. Go somewhere, even if it's just for a weekend. Clear your head. The idea stuck with me. I hadn't thought about taking time for myself, but maybe that was exactly what I needed. That weekend, I drove out to a small cabin a few hours away. It wasn't much, just a quiet spot by a lake, but it gave me space to think. Sitting on the porch, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt a rare moment of peace. For the first time, I realized that moving forward didn't mean forgetting or pretending it hadn't happened. It just meant letting go of the things I couldn't change and focusing on what came next. It was a small step, but it felt like the beginning of something new. And for now, that was enough. When I got back from the cabin, I felt clearer, lighter, like I could breathe again. The quiet days away had helped me think about where I wanted to go from here. For the first time, I wasn't just reacting to what had happened. I was thinking about what I wanted for myself. Rachel called the evening I returned. "How was it?" she asked. "Peaceful," I said. It was nice to just exist without all the noise. "I'm glad," she said. "You deserve that." Her voice had a warmth to it, something steady and comforting. It struck me how much Rachel had been a lifeline these past few weeks. She never pressured me, never asked for anything, just let me process things at my own pace. "Thanks, Rachel," I said. "For everything. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." "Don't thank me," she replied softly. "We've been helping each other, Ben. That's what friends do." The next few days passed quietly, but there was an undercurrent of change. I started spending more time with my family, visiting my sister Rachel and her kids. They had a way of pulling me out of my head, making me laugh even when I didn't feel like it. One afternoon, as we sat on her porch watching the kids play, she said, "You seem better." I nodded. "I think I'm starting to be." She smiled. "I'm proud of you. It takes a lot to pick yourself up after something like this." Hearing those words from her meant more than I could say. Meanwhile, Rachel, David's wife, had made her decision. She called me one evening, her voice steady. "I told David I want a divorce," she said. "How did he take it?" I asked. "Not well," she admitted. "But I can't keep pretending we can fix this. It's over, and I deserve better." Her resolve impressed me. Rachel had always seemed so composed, but now I saw a strength in her that I hadn't noticed before. "I'm proud of you," I said. "That's not an easy decision to make." "Thanks," she said. "I think it's the right one though. It's time to move forward." Her words mirrored my own thoughts. For the first time in weeks, I felt like we were both stepping out of the shadows of what had happened and into something brighter. The next weekend, Rachel and I met for lunch. It felt different this time, not weighed down by anger or sadness, but lighter, more hopeful. "I've been thinking about taking a painting class," she said between bites of her salad. "I've always wanted to, but I never made time for it." "You should," I said. "You deserve to do something for yourself." "What about you?" she asked. "What's next for Ben?" I thought about it for a moment. "I don't know," I admitted. "But I think that's okay. I'm just trying to figure out what makes me happy again." She smiled. "That's a good place to start." As we walked out of the restaurant, I realized how far we'd both come. There was still pain, of course, but there was also hope. And for the first time, that felt like enough to keep going. Over the next few weeks, life began to feel like mine again. It wasn't perfect. I still had bad days where the weight of the betrayal hit me out of nowhere. But the good days started to outnumber the bad. Rachel and I continued to stay in touch, meeting up occasionally to check in on each other. Our conversations shifted from being about David and Laura to being about our plans for the future. She started her painting class and sent me photos of her first attempts, messy but full of life. I started running again, something I hadn't done in years, and found it gave me clarity. One evening, Rachel called me out of the blue. "You're not going to believe this," she said, her voice a mix of amusement and frustration. "What?" I asked. "David showed up at my house," she said. "With flowers." I groaned. "What did he want?" "To apologize." "Again," she said, sighing. "He said he made a mistake and wants to work things out. He even brought up how it'd be better for the kids if we stayed together." "What did you say?" "I told him the truth," she replied. "That I'm done. That it's too late for apologies." He didn't take it well, but I stood my ground. I couldn't help but smile. "Good for you, Rachel." "Thanks," she said. It felt empowering, you know? To finally say what I've been holding back for so long. A few days later, I had my own unexpected encounter with Laura. I was at the grocery store, pushing a cart down the cereal aisle, when I saw her. She froze when she spotted me, her expression a mix of guilt and hesitation. "Hi, Ben," she said quietly. I nodded. "Laura." For a moment, we just stood there, the air between us heavy. Finally, she spoke. "How are you?" "Better," I said honestly. "What about you?" She looked down, fidgeting with the hem of her sweater. "I'm trying. It's hard, but I'm trying." I didn't say anything, and she took a deep breath before continuing. "I want you to know I'm sorry. I know I said it before, but I need you to know I mean it." "I know," I said, my voice calm but firm. "But sorry doesn't fix what happened, Laura. It doesn't undo the choices you made." Her eyes welled up with tears, and for a moment, I felt a pang of sympathy. But I knew better than to let it sway me. "I hope you find what you're looking for," I said, turning my cart and walking away. It wasn't dramatic or emotional, it was just closure. After that, I threw myself into new experiences. I signed up for a weekend hiking group, something I'd always wanted to try but never made time for. The first hike was tough, both physically and mentally, but by the end of it, I felt like I'd accomplished something. One of the group members, a woman named Emily, struck up a conversation with me during the hike. She had an easy laugh and a curious way of looking at the world. We talked about everything from our favorite books to our worst travel experiences. By the end of the hike, she asked if I'd like to grab a coffee sometime. For the first time in a long time, I didn't hesitate. "I'd like that," I said. That night, I called Rachel to tell her about the hike. "So you met someone," she said teasingly. "It's just coffee," I said, laughing. "But yeah, I guess I did." "I'm happy for you, Ben," she said sincerely. "You deserve to find happiness again." "So do you," I said. "And you will." We talked for a while longer before saying goodnight. As I hung up the phone, I realized how far we'd both come. Life didn't magically become perfect after that. There were still hard days, moments of doubt and sadness. But there was also hope that the pain didn't have to define me, that there was more waiting for me beyond the betrayal. As I sat on my porch that evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, I felt something I hadn't felt in months: peace. It wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning to live with it, to let it shape me without letting it break me. This was my life now, imperfect, unpredictable, and entirely my own. And for the first time, that felt like enough.